My name is Bill Tashima. I'm a Sansei. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And in 1981, I moved out to Seattle, Washington, where I now live with my husband.
I see. Okay. So you've been married for a while? Or
Yes. I've been married since 2013. Prior to that, was in a very long-term relationship, but my first partner passed away from AIDS.
I see. Okay. And tell me again when you moved out to Washington?
I moved in 1981. I was fortunate to have a job with the federal government, and I realized that I could do that job anywhere, and so why not see the country? If I didn't like it, I could always move back to Cleveland. And I know in the back of my mind, a bigger reason also was an opportunity to come out. I think I could have come out in Cleveland. I had a group of supportive friends. My family was there, and I loved Cleveland, but it just seemed it might be easier if I was in a community that didn't know who really I was.
I see, right. No history there.
Yeah.
Right. So in Cleveland, was there a Japanese American?
There was a large, well, there was a couple thousand of Japanese Americans. The only reason Japanese Americans were in Cleveland was, one, they were interned or incarcerated. There's several ways you could get out of camp. One way was if you were sponsored by an employee or a church, you could leave the camp. And so my mom, who was from Wapato at Hard Mountain, came out because there was a job available. My dad, who was in Poston from LA, went out. All the people there, Nisei, that came out of the camps were over the same age. Usually between, when you think about it, 18 to 25 roughly, mostly unmarried, all in the same predicament, poor, not knowing anybody there. They formed their own social groups, pairings, and that's how they met their future spouses, families.
And what did people from Cleveland, Nisei's from Cleveland, do employment-wise? How did they get by economically?
That's interesting because at first they reverted to just what I would consider menial jobs that was available. And so the service jobs, housekeeping for women, secretarial jobs, maybe more manual labor. But then in the 50s and 60s, where they became more integrated into the community, and they were able to get semi-professional jobs or professional jobs according to their training, and then prosper. And so they restarted their lives and did very, very well for the most part.
Did the Japanese American community live in proximity to one another?
When they first came from camps, they were almost always located in the inner city because housing was cheap. After beginning in the 1950s, people began to move out, not only to other parts of the city, but then later in the 60s to the suburbs. Even though they became dispersed, they still retained the Japanese American ties with our community picnics, with our JACL, Buddhist Church, Japanese Christian Church, Nisei Tennis Club, things like that.
So was your family part of those organizations?
My dad was very active at one time with JACL. He was the president of the chapter in 1948. And I think they were.
As a JACL?
I grew up, and my parents took a lot of effort to be sure that I was instilled with a pride in being Japanese American, and also making sure that I knew that I was a full American. So I thought that part of the upbringing was really, really good. There were a couple downsides to that.
So in your schooling, did you go to school mostly with Caucasian people?
Yes. Yes. Well, I want to say Caucasian. Up until 6th grade, it was predominantly African American. And then we moved to the suburbs, and then it was predominantly Caucasian. There would be one or two other Sansei in my class, only because we always had a family friend that lived close by.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so how did you see yourself as a Japanese American, knowing, your parents had come out of camp, that you weren't exactly in the majority in your area?
Well, back then, I think it might have been the influence of my parents, but I took a great pride in being Japanese American, and I took a great pride in the accomplishments. My parents always made sure that I knew about the 442 and how we sacrificed and voluntarily went into camps. At the time, my dad was a really good friend of Mike Masaoka.
Oh, okay.
Which is interesting only because as I grew up and became more familiar with incidents about JACL during the war, some of my views might have changed, but it wasn't totally negative because I always thought what happened in the war was so terrible, and everybody had to make to make any decision, as long as you endured, that would be okay. That was good. I think I was totally really naive. It was something that I saw on TV. If you think about TV from the 60s, you knew that you have boyfriends and girlfriends and all this stuff. And I saw myself as, I'm gonna have a girlfriend, I'm gonna get married. And I knew I always had an attraction toward men, and I knew that I was forming close relations with male friends. But again, I think I was just naive. I didn't assign a sexuality to that. It wasn't until I was like maybe 13 that one of my really good friends was laughing, and he says, "Well, you're just a homosexual." And he says, "You don't even know what that term means, do you, Bill?" And I didn't. And I said, "Well, of course I know what that means. And I'm not a homosexual." But I didn't have no idea what it meant. So later on, I looked it up, and I said, "Oh, maybe I'm a homosexual." But then I didn't think about it anymore. And in my line of thinking, very naive, I just thought, okay, this is a stage. I'll get out of it. I'll grow up, and sooner or later I'll just be attracted to women. And then I didn't have a hard time in high school or college because I was somewhat popular. I was like senior student council president, and I voted like court and stuff like that. And I used to go out with girls, and it was not a fake relationship because I cared about everybody that I dated. But I realized there was no sexual part of that. That part started in high school and continued, and I realized that yes, I don't think I'm going to grow out of this. And I think that, and I know that I am sexually attracted to men, but if I don't do anything, then I'm really not a homosexual. We didn't have the term gay back then. It was just homosexual. I was not a homosexual. If I didn't do anything, then that would be okay. And then, I just knew that there were some things I couldn't do. I think when I was in high school, I had an idea that I might, I had an inclination for politics, but I was thinking, well, you can't do that. And then I'm not being melodramatic at all, but I just saw my life as, okay, I hope I can get married. I think and this will be my little secret. And I think I could get by. And as long as I don't do anything, it'll be okay. But then I also thought, if anybody ever finds out, I think I have to kill myself. But that wasn't as dramatic as it sounds. It was just my naive way of thinking that nobody does this. And when I think about it, I start thinking about how there were no gay role models. There was no, every depiction of a homosexual was negative. And every movie that I saw that had anyone that was a homosexual, that had any type of positive characteristics, what did they do? They always killed themselves. One of the movies I think about was Advice and Consent. And in then a Mormon senator from Utah, was a very heroic character, courageous, but he happens to be a homosexual. When it's found out, what does he do? He killed himself. So anyway, I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but it was just,
That was the culture.
that's how I thought. And then everything about a homosexual was always negative. It was always, very we're using the word Nelly back then. It was more effeminate, yes. And I didn't consider myself like that.
Well, you fit in. It's
You know.
like you were able to fit in.
Yeah,
with
and
the
so
rest of the boys.
and so that's my thinking.
Sure.
And then things changed.
And how did that evolve? And how did that thinking evolve? Was that precipitated by the move to Washington?
I think it happened before. I think it was a slow process. I started when I was in Cleveland. I started to go to a couple gay bars.
Oh.
I participated in some group discussions and at that time also in the early '70s, the entire gay studies was kind of just blossoming. Okay, and so there was more of a good discussion. And then I remember going to one, and there was a group of people, and for some reason I considered myself more educated on this, or more, not sophisticated, more at ease with myself. And I was mistaken. I remember talking, I said, well, with gay people, this is how they think, and this is what they do. And then I remember this distinctly. The leader said, that's interesting, Bill, but why do you keep saying they? Why don't you say the same things and say I? And then I think that was for me a quantum leap when I started to say I. And then I realized, yes, I am gay. And so then it was a matter of more confronting issues. And how I would do that was another long step. So that involved, telling some of my close friends. That involved initially having physical contact, and realizing, coming to grips of who I am, and then trying to develop a strategy of what I would do. Yeah.
Were you frightened or exhilarated, or a combination of both during that process? How did you feel during that process?
That's a good question, because when I would go to a gay bar, or when there was a potential, or if I had physical contact or relations, I would say, yeah, it was exhilarating. I mean, it would be like I would imagine any young person, but part of the excitement at a gay bar was just seeing all these people that were just like you, and not having to pretend, okay? And then you realize, it's the same whether you're gay or straight. I mean, it's kind of like you find someone that's attractive, and then you start worrying, well, do they see me, or trying to impress them, and I don't think that's got anything to do with sexuality, but then I realized the feeling that comes with that. Yeah, I remember that I enjoyed that, but the part was in Cleveland, the bars tended to be I don't know how to explain it, more dark and unlit, and it was smoky. And then when I moved to Seattle, of course, I was quite a bit older. I had just turned 30. But that's where I felt a real excitement, because of course that was the beginning that was disco for one thing. And you walk in and there's this pounding, throbbing music and all these lights and all, we were all young, and I think we were all at that time, fairly well looking, and there was a physical feel, and then you could be yourself. Yeah, that was good. My first partner, that's kind of interesting, because my first at the time, okay, when I moved from Cleveland to Seattle, okay, and it was like, Seattle was a completely different scene. I actually lived in a gay area called Capitol Hill, and it was, and 30 is old at the time, but you're still competitive, I think. And then we got hit with this boom. All of a sudden, things got bleak and people started to get sick, and we didn't know what was going on. I remember my friend and I going to the Seattle Central College because they're going to talk about this new gay cancer, which is what they called it back then. And the place was packed. And then they started talking about the syndrome, and then that put a damper on it. And then at the same time, I had read a book called The Front Runner, and it had a real hero that happened to be gay. And one of the premises was that he said to this other person, "No, I'm sorry, I only have sex with people that I love." And somehow that affected me, and I thought, what am I doing? I had never thought as a gay person, I never really thought about love in terms of a long-term relationship. Now it's commonplace, but I think back then, you were happy to be yourself, but no one talked about long-term relationships. Nobody really talked about like moving in and setting up house or things like this. And so I said, that's what I do. I used to go to bars then. But then when I saw my first partner, as soon as I saw him, I thought, you're different. We talked it over. And then we ended up together for, maybe 13 years, I think. Yeah. And then...
how many of those years was he sick?
It was about 8, which was an awfully long time at that time. Yes. And I think that's one thing that people don't understand today is just how devastating this was to our community. And to think about, I just remember at the gay men's chorus that we used to go to, and then seeing people, having people, and looking at the newspaper every week and seeing people's obituary, and then going to a concert. And at that time, you could actually, to me, you could look at someone and you knew. There was a kind of a gaunt look, and you knew. And then, and there was helplessness because there's nothing you could do. And then when he first got sick, it was through pneumocystis pneumonia, and so we thought of something else, and that must be something else. And when the diagnosis came, then we thought, well, we know what it is. And then it was kind of like they said, well, do you want to get tested? And I thought about it, and I said, no. Because at that time, why would you want to get tested? I mean, why would you want to know that you have this death sentence? But we had those 8 years were good, and we did a lot of traveling, and we did what we could, but there was a lot of work. Again, the medicine was really medical knowledge was really limited. And I know myself, that's the beginning of the internet. But I would spend nights going through these net groups looking for anecdotal information and then reading these underground newspapers. But it helped because through that I was able to suggest to my doctor, well, you know, like, I mean, Lou has to get these transfusions like every 6 weeks. There's a new drug called Epigen. Can we use that? And he goes, well, we'll try it, and it worked. You know, things like that. So, but anyway, yeah, it was very difficult. I remember when the weekend he died, it was really sad, but at the same time, I think that was the closest we were because we spent every moment at the end together. But one sad thing was when he found out that he had AIDS, that closed us off completely. He didn't want anybody to know that he was gay or that I was gay. He didn't want anybody to know that he was sick. So in that case, I had to basically give very little information to my own family. When people came over to visit, I didn't invite them to stay at the house. Could you stay at this hotel? And for me, and because I'm kind of outgoing that way in hospitality, I think it was unusual for my family, but I think that that's the way it was. And so then that's probably the most closeted I was in the outside people, not the friends that knew. I think it was just his faith in me, I think, you know. And he always had a plan. And I think he thought bigger than I did. I know he did. And so, for example, I never thought that I would ever be able to afford a house and that I would always be renting. And he had a pretty low-paying job, but he saved a lot, and he actually owned 2 other properties at the time. And he's, no, we can do this. Let's buy this house, and we can do it. And then yeah, we can do this, and then he would do it, and then yeah, it's pretty good. And yeah, I think just the fact that he always was happy with things that I did, you know, and then it made me feel very important. When he passed away, that's when I came out to people at work because I had told my boss, and I said I need to take time off, and I was off work for about 7 or 8 weeks, and I said, this is what you could tell people, that my partner of like 13 years had passed away. And then I told my family, and my sister, who I'm very close with, I told her, and she says, I said, you must have known that I was gay. And she goes, no. And then later on she told me, a lot of times, she goes, Bill, a lot of times people don't think about that with you, whether you're gay or straight, you know. You have to tell people. My brother, who I thought was going to be, he's pretty conservative. So I told him, and I was just truly touched because I said, no, Lou wanted a private funeral service. I'm going to just bury him myself. And he said, no. He says, I'll come out. And I said, no. And then my sister-in-law called and says, Bill, Erlen really wants to be with you at this time. So that touched me a lot. So how did I cope? For the first 2 years, almost every day I went to the cemetery with my dog, and we would talk to my partner. And then after that, I thought, okay, you got to start doing stuff. So that's when I became active with the community, doing things like JACL, Chinese Information Service Center, things like that. And then after about 10 years, I said, okay, it's time for me to try to meet someone, and that was a really hard decision because I'm not young anymore. It's hard to put yourself back out on the market. It's kind of like, how do you meet someone when you were young? You go out with people. You don't go out and think, am I going to end up with this person? You don't think that, but when you're older, you start thinking that way. And then, I have dating online, so I did, and then that's how I met my current partner, and again, there was just something that clicked. I said, this person's special, and then, it happened, and now we're married, and it's the best thing that happened to me. Oh, he makes me happy. I tell him, he's always telling jokes, and I pretend like that's not funny or anything. But I said, Chris, you make me smile and laugh every day, and you even try harder when you know I'm not feeling well, And I think that's the thing. We're somewhat opposite. He's very physical. He's a downhill national champ mountain bike.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not. But we coexist really well. I mean, we love each other. I think that the happiest day of my life was when we got married.
That's so wonderful.
And then just before we got married, we had a small wedding. But then I looked out, and everybody that meant anything to me in my life was there. All my relatives, my best friends, people that I used to work with. And then we had a community celebration later, and there was about 200 people there, but it was everyone from our community that was there, and I thought that was really good. And then what's funny about it was, I looked at this as a celebration. I didn't think I was making any type of statement at all, even though it was.
Sure.
But later on, people were saying how much they appreciated that they could share this. And I can't tell you how many Nisei came up to me and said, it means a lot. We don't tell people this, but our son is gay or our daughter is gay.
Oh, wow.
And it made us happy to see you so happy.
Wow. So you are a trailblazer.
I'm not. No. But it was one of those things. So yeah. No, it's so difficult because I could tell my 20-year-old self anything and he wouldn't listen. If I could do anything to change myself, though, it would be not to worry about the little stuff and to be able to tell the difference between little stuff and what's important, and to realize some things are going to change, and the only thing that matters is what matters. So be able to know the difference, and also know that if you're honest and you're honest to yourself and with others, things will be better. Things will be better.